It's easy to get stuck reaching for the same familiar fruits and vegetables, even when you know a colorful variety is key. Balance of Nature's fruits and veggie supplements don't replace fruits and vegetables, but it makes it easy to add more variety to what you already eat. With 31 ingredients that are whole fruits and vegetables, switching it up is easy because we've already taken care of the hard part. Go to balanceofnature.com and get a free fiber and spice supplement, plus 35% off your first set as a new preferred customer by using discount code POD.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Carvana makes car selling fast and easy from start to finish. Enter your license plate or VIN and get a real offer in seconds, down to the penny. If you accept, Carvana will come pick up your car from your driveway. Or you can drop it off at one of our car vending machines. Either way, you get paid instantly. It's fast, transparent, and 100% online. Car selling that saves your time. That's Carvana.
Carvana.
Pickup fees may apply.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
It's 5 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us on our next expedition on the Dr. Sky Experience. Rightly so, here on the powerhouse of radio stations, Talk Radio 77, WABC, as you know. Lots of interesting things to talk about, ladies and gentlemen, always many from the mysteries that keep our minds at least expanding them. And, of course, your questions and comments on great subjects. If you're a first-time listener to this particular radio archive, we discuss in detail with great guests astronomy, space, aviation, weather, and so many other things. Celebrity guests and American exceptionalism stories. To get in touch with our radio show, we love what we consider to be dialogue of the 4 types of conversation, in the form of critical thinking. Yes, indeed. The contact number, as always, is 1-800-848-9222. 1-800-848-9222. Email me, DRSKY, Dr. Sky at WABCRadio.com. And of course, you can always go to the WABCRadio.com website to replay many, not only of this particular radio archive, the Dr. Sky Experience, but how about all the other great hosts here on this radio station 24/7. And let's not forget, RedAppleAudioNetworks.com. We like to call the producers and those that operate behind the scenes, ladies and gentlemen, so important to our success here, and the big success it is. We call them the helmsmen. And we say thank you to Tony and Bill navigating this very powerful signal of 77 WABC out to you, no matter where you're listening to us on, let's say, the West Coast, still on a Saturday evening, or as we go deeper into a Sunday morning, and all other places around the nation and around the world. Great guests as always, as you tell us. And when you email me, we can't guarantee it, but we certainly listen to and write back to all those emails that you send and respond. And we have gotten a number of good guests per your own recommendations, ladies and gentlemen. Let's continue for the 2 hours with another very special guest. He's appeared here before. He's Tom Harris, the Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. And we'll be discussing some of these topics, ladies and gentlemen, that I hope are important to you. Because as we know, our lives are usually run in the daytime by the power of the sun, and we have this opportunity, a unique opportunity and a privilege and honor for me to be behind this microphone to share with you as we move deeper into the night and have opportunities, maybe longer than maybe sometimes in the daytime, to discuss and open our minds. The subject is the climate scare, or is it just the opposite? How is climate scare going? Is it dying? Does Bill Gates have some changes on ideas on climate change? And ladies and gentlemen, right now as we speak, or just about another day or so, a major climate change event is happening, believe it or not, down in the great nation state of Brazil, in an area called Belém. It's called COP30, November 10th to the 21st. And our very special guest, who we'll introduce right now, Tom Harris, has been the Executive Director of the science-based nonpartisan group, the International Climate Science Coalition, for the past 3 years, and he's also led the nonprofit spin-off to this organization, the International Climate Science Coalition in Canada. Until 2011, he taught a total of 1,500 students at Carleton University in the second year, an Earth Sciences course called Climate Change and Earth Sciences Perspective. For the past 18 years, Tom has been working intensively and very accurately with a team of independent scientists and engineers to promote a sensible approach to a range of energy and environmental topics, climate change in particular. His main focus has been telling the public about the highly controversial science underlying the dangerous human cause, climate change hypothesis. And we welcome our very special guest, Tom Harris. Tom, good morning to you. It's 29 degrees in Canada, where you're located, a balmy 67 degrees here, and to our base location, the powerhouse, Talk Radio 77 WABC, 52 degrees in the great city, New York City. How you doing, Tom?
Well, pretty good. I'll probably get out skiing tomorrow. We have 5 to 15 centimeters of snow coming.
Wow. Yeah, I'll say I like it to keep that snow away from me for a while, but people who come to Arizona know you can just go 2 hours away in these times of year into December, and you can enjoy it in the higher elevations. But, Tom, there's so much to talk about in so limited time, maybe, even though 2 hours. I mean, we want to get our listeners out there involved in this particular conversation. And it's really interesting, Tom, because every time that you're on the air, we always enlighten people on what's really happening, in your opinion, from the whole climate science, environment. So let's begin with what I was leading up to, the COP30, the big event that's happening in Brazil, this amazing, conference of people coming together. You've kind of dug deeper into this, and give us your thoughts on what's going on behind this, and in your opinion, why maybe this is a total waste of time from the environmental side.
Yeah, it's probably a waste of time even for the UN, because the United States, of course, they're not sending any high-level representatives at all. And the massive global climate fund that the developing world are demanding, they're demanding $300 billion a year from the developed countries. And the United States has said they're not going to give any. So good luck trying to collect that. So I have a feeling this conference is going to fail because, China's leader did not come either. So, we're not seeing the kind of participation that they were hoping to have. And, of course, it's totally hypocritical because Brazil is becoming a major oil exporter. In fact, petroleum and fossil fuels is the largest commodity that they export. They're now the 8th largest producer, or I should say exporter of oil. So it's kind of funny when they have it in a petro state and they're telling us not to have petroleum.
Fantastic information here as we dig deeper into the whole subject of climate change, fact or fiction, and from our guest, a very interesting person, Tom Harris, who's been here many times before. And ladies and gentlemen, I do get a lot of positive emails on Tom Harris. And again, if you'd like to learn more about his organization, his website is ics-canada.com. And you'll find a plethora of information there. So many things. And there's actually some things that you can do there that you summarize. Talk about a little bit about your website, because right on the front page you talk about, of course, promoting sensible and responsible climate policy. And you have 22 facts here on prominent climate topics, and carry the ball because there's so much more to the website. Tell us about it.
Well, yeah, and in particular, people can order a book that we put together with a group called Canadians for Sensible Climate Policy, as well as the Heartland Institute out of Illinois, and it basically summarizes the whole climate debate. It looks at policy, it looks at, the different political and economic things, and of course it addresses the science. And it shows that there is no climate emergency. I always laugh when they say it's an existential threat. I say, well, then the world must be doing pretty well if something that is so trivial as a 1.2 degree rise in 145 years, which is what even the UN admits has happened. If that's the greatest threat facing humanity, wow, we must be doing fantastically.
Right. Sensible and responsible climate policy is the things that we'll be talking about. And ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to agree, but make your best case. Again, I don't like to use the term debate here on this radio format. This is more what, Tom? As we talk about opening our minds to possibilities. And we, of course, love the concept of critical thinking, which in my opinion, I keep talking about critical thinking. I think it's lacking as we talk to a lot of young people in the school systems and parents. They say they should really be teaching those curriculums so everybody out there has the ability to come to, even if you're an opposing view or opposing side, the process of critical thinking. What say you? Obviously a positive, right?
Well, yeah, and in fact, I welcome debate because debate was what moved me from being a climate alarmist to a climate realist. I wrote an article in a local newspaper about how studying the planets, because of course I was an aerospace engineer, and so I love space exploration, how studying the planets helps us understand the Earth. And I said, look what happened on Venus. Venus has 95% CO2 in the atmosphere. If we increase CO2, we could become another Venus. Well, a local professor who doesn't want me to use his name because, of course, it's dangerous for people in the academic community to speak out against the climate scare, but he actually brought me into his lab and he showed me that there was no correlation between carbon dioxide and CO2 in Earth's history if you go back in geologic time. In fact, Dr. Sky, the one data point that really shook me was that at 440 million years ago, we had more than 10 times the level of CO2 that we have today, and yet it was one of the coldest periods in the last 500 million years. So, geologists know that the whole climate issue is ridiculous. We're at one of the lower temperatures in Earth's history. We're certainly at one of the lowest levels of CO2, and the geologic record doesn't show that we drive, temperature with CO2. It's just not there. And so what they do is they just don't invite geologists to the media.
No, you're right. And there's so much more to explore about this. But let's introduce something to the audience. As we say, we open our minds here on this radio show. And hopefully, and obviously, I get mine opened up by people like yourself and other great guests. Knowles' law of media accuracy, and I'll take a stab at it. Quote, everything you read in the newspapers is absolutely true, except for the rare story of which you happen to have first-hand knowledge, end quote. What a prolific statement. Describe this in terms of how we talk about climate policy and for your research, because, hey, you don't believe, and I don't think most people believe everything they read in the internet or hear on broadcast television or even radio. So take a stab at that, because that opens up the conversation even deeper.
Oh, for sure. In fact, the things they're pointing to are levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Well, first of all, carbon dioxide is a trace gas. It's invisible. It's odorless. It's harmless at these kinds of levels. And so we can't see it. So when scientists tell us it's skyrocketing, it's going up, we don't have any way of checking that. Similarly, when they talk about the Earth has warmed 1.2 degrees in 145 years since 1880, how can we tell? We can't tell. That amount of change is so small and so gradual, you wouldn't notice it in your entire lifetime. A friend of mine, Susan Crockford, she's a biologist who studies polar bears. And so unless you're a person like her, how do you know that there are, in fact, 5 times as many polar bears now than there were in 1960? You would never know that. Yes. So Al Gore and company can say, and by the way, Al Gore is going to be at COP30, so that's an interesting point to discuss. But he would say polar bears are an indication of climate change, to which I would say, well, no, it's an indication of outlawing polar bear hunting. And that's why their numbers have increased so much. So all of these different things are either invisible, like CO2, or the tiny, tiny temperature change that there's been over the last 145 years, or they're so remote that only experts like Susan Crockford even know about it.
It's amazing. Let's also mention Dr. Patrick Moore here in another way to open people's minds, a book entitled Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom. An interesting book for people out there, right, to go out and check out so that they can be fully informed, not behind the curtain, but in front of it, so they can understand really, in many people's opinions, what's really happening with the so-called climate scare. Please comment on that. I think that's an interesting book.
It's a very interesting book, and it goes through everything, not just the climate issues, but it goes through all sorts of other issues that we talk about, like plastic in the oceans or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, Patrick Moore is a very interesting guy because he was one of the founders of Greenpeace. Okay?
So I didn't know on that. Wow.
Yeah. And in fact, one day after the fall of the Berlin Wall, he looked around the boardroom because he was, one of the absolute leaders, and he realized he was the only non-Marxist there. And so what happened was, when communism collapsed in Europe, a lot of the environmentalists just moved over to a lot of the peace activists moved over to the environmental movement and essentially took it over. So he realized that, the big thing that triggered him was that they wanted to outlaw chlorine. And he said, Well, you realize that chlorine is like a natural element in the periodic table. How are you going to outlaw it? And not only that, the use of chlorine in drinking water and other things has been a massive, massive health benefit. So he realized that they were just totally off base. And
exactly.
So he left.
You bring up a good point. Right. You bring up a great point there, Tom, because it's like carbon dioxide. You can't see it. You basically can't smell it. It's not like having gold bullion or, gold bricks in your hand. You can't, theoretically collect it as a substance of touch and feel. So obviously, not to dismiss it. There may be reasons for doing some kind of control on things of this type. But the point that we're trying to make on this radio show, and your participation, ladies and gentlemen, is most important. 1-800-848-9222. If you're somebody out there who says, I've had enough of this whole climate scare thing, or you have some opinions that differ, certainly we welcome your opinions here on this particular radio archive known as the Dr. Sky Experience. 1-800-848-9222. Let's talk a little bit more about what's happening. You've written some other articles that, go very strongly in the direction of talking about how, in your opinion, Tom Harris, many of these things are alarmist and they don't really check as far as with real science. That's an important thing. But let's talk a little bit about something else here. Is and how is this climate scare dying, in your opinion? You've written about this and extrapolate on that. I think it's interesting.
Well, yeah, the biggest mover of the dying of the climate scare was the election of Donald Trump. Okay, that broke the ice for a lot of people, and now people can say things not as extreme as him, but they can say part of what he said, and they can now get away with it. He did the world a huge service by giving that speech at the United Nations a couple of months ago. I mean, he called the climate scare a complete hoax, and, he laid it all down. And these are all things that many of the delegates in the UN, a lot of them would know this, but they would never dare say it. Now it's become less politically incorrect, and so you're seeing other people move over, too. Bill Gates, this is a big development. He wrote a book back, I think it was 2021, in which he was saying that this is a massive catastrophe, the climate issue. And now he's saying, well, no, it's not really a massive catastrophe. It's a problem, but it's much more important for us to work on helping people overcome disease and poverty. So what he's done is he's taken Bjørn Lomborg's position from the Copenhagen Center in Denmark. And interestingly enough, he's actually funding Lomborg now. He actually gave him $3.5 million. So what we're seeing, of course, across Europe is, especially with the Ukraine war and their dependence on Russia for natural gas, is we're seeing them going back to more basic energy sources like coal, and we're going to see that more and more across the world. And certainly India and China have made it very clear they're going to continue to build coal stations, which are very cheap by comparison with other sources. Absolutely. They're going to build them all over the world. And so, the climate scare is dying for various reasons. Trump is a big one, but also people need energy. And the data centers and the AI needs huge amounts of energy, and Bill Gates knows that. He knows that you're not going to power an AI data center with wind power. And so it's just becoming a matter of practicality. People want to survive. They want to build these centers, and you cannot do it with these so-called green energy sources.
Well, Tom, maybe we'll electrify, no pun intended, the listeners in the New York metro area, because we've been hearing over the time we've had you and from other subject matters we've covered, the outstreperous and outrageous electric bills that so many people are getting. Well, it's not just in the New York, New Jersey area, but even here in Arizona. I mean, look, with the preponderance of all these electric vehicles, whether you like them or not, ladies and gentlemen, how does this electric grid sustain itself? And what we're going to do in hour number 2 is something very interesting, and I want to leave this as a little surprise to you and the listeners. But ladies and gentlemen, when I was 9 years old living in New York City, on this particular date, November the 9th, 1965, we had a major blackout, 5:25 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 60 years ago, November 9th, 1965. I remember. I was there in New York City, and I witnessed the whole thing, and it's amazing because so many people may not have been alive at that time. They may remember the blackout in New York in 1977, but the reason I'm mentioning this, even then there was something wrong. Did you even experience that in Canada during that time? I don't even know if you were alive then. I mean, maybe I'm dating myself. Yes.
No, I was 12, so probably I can remember that we had a big blackout, and actually even the snowplows couldn't get through, and so it's probably one that we experienced as well, because
not to alarm people, but Tom, since you experienced it too, I was 9, as I mentioned, not to be overly repetitive. 1965, that's 60 years ago. But what happened? Something small, without going into all the details, you probably know more about it, is that something happened at a substation with just a tiny little switch or a relay, and that caused a cascading event to a good portion of the northeastern part of the United States. Why am I mentioning that? Because look at how the overdependence on the electric grid is today, and from the various nations that may want to explode an electromagnetic pulse weapon in the atmosphere. Don't laugh, ladies and gentlemen. Or simply this, our dependence on electricity, the cost of it. All these data centers are being built around the world, and wow. So what do we do to look for alternate sources of energy that are reliable and have what, as you talk about, a reasonable and, of course, some sort of a policy that we can all get along? This is an interesting subject to talk about, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. And, there's a real important reason that we should not get rid of coal, because natural gas gets supplied into a natural gas turbine from somewhere else, okay? They don't store much of it on site. But in the case of coal, they have a big pile of coal for years. They'll be able to draw from that source. So coal and nuclear, by the way, because you store the nuclear power on site as well, those are very solid energy sources that protect the grid, okay? And in fact, that's a good reason why we should definitely keep coal. And, using the latest pollution technology, we can actually make coal very, very cleanly. A friend of mine went to a coal station. He was actually an Egyptian. He was a director general in Egypt of energy, and he went to a coal station in Sweden. And it was right beside a daycare. And he was amazed. He said, "You got a coal station right beside a daycare?" And they said, "Sure. We brought in the latest pollution control, and it's a very clean station." And it was true. He couldn't see any pollution at all. So, people talk about coal as being an old technology. No, coal is just a resource. How we burn it is the technology, and we have lots of clean ways to burn it. And, of course, China and India, they know coal is a cheap form of electricity, so they're pushing it all over the world.
Tom, it's very interesting going back, and you know, of course, maybe more details about this, but in World War II, the Germans had developed the coal gasification processes. I read something about that. So that was an exploratory way to do what? Take out a lot of the ambient pollutions or pollutants that were in coal. I don't know how successful it was, but it goes back even maybe before that. I don't know. Tell us.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Coal gasification is a very important technology, and in fact, they are working on it more and more because, of course, if you gasify it, then you can pump it around through pipes. I'm not sure of the latest on that topic, but it's an important way to use coal.
Absolutely, and let's get our vast family, as we call them, out there, all 24/7 here on Talk Radio 77 WABC, involved in the conversation as they would like. 1-800-848-9222. Ladies and gentlemen, your concerns, opinions, and maybe we struck a nerve because of the electric bills that are going on all throughout, not only the Northeast, but also all over the country, all over the world. And you can't just keep doing that if the whole grid goes down, right? Overdependence on something that can't handle the load is only going to wind up causing more blackouts. As I mentioned, in a little different twist, 60 years ago, November the 9th, 1965. Yes, maybe you were there too, ladies and gentlemen. A very serious event happened. It happened once again in 1977 in the New York area. And in hour number 2, we'll go back in our time machine here about what was actually played on air on Talk Radio 77 WABC quite a long time ago. Tom, so many topics to talk about. So when we come back from the break in just a couple of minutes here, I'd like to get into a further discussion of your articles here, but I didn't want to cut you short. Anything else that you can tell us in 2 minutes before we go to that break on what's happening at COP30, a big event happening in Belém in Brazil?
That's right. Well, people have got to watch out for what they call newspeak. You remember in 1984 that there was a new kind of language they created, which would trick you into thinking in the way the state wanted you to think. And you're going to see a lot of that at COP30. You're going to hear about carbon pollution. which of course is not pollution, it's not carbon. You're going to hear about green energy that's not green, and we can get into more of this later. You're going to hear about the Amazon being the lungs of the earth, which is completely
right.
insane. It's totally wrong, and it's even funny when I explain it in more detail.
Right, and they built a highway, not to steal your thunder here on the Dr. Sky Show, but there was a highway that kind of segregated sides of the Amazon, and obviously the indigenous people that live there, they can't even use it for other purposes, what? All to bring in the people for the big COP30 event, and burning what, ladies and gentlemen, and what? Tom, lots of jet fuel with corporate jets, and not there's anything wrong with corporate jets, but don't be a hypocrite if you're trying to tell us that corporate jets are causing an incident increase in what? Carbon dioxide in the troposphere. Powerful stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
more with you, Tom, when we come back here on the Dr. Sky Experience. 1-800-848-9222. We say thank you to our big family around the nation and the world. And again, thanks to our navigators and helmsmen, Tony and Bill, making this show sound as good as you would expect. We'll be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. Dr. Sky Experience. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. A Native American proverb as we continue to move through time and space. And we thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being part of this family. Here on Talk Radio 77 WABC, we welcome your commentary on all the subjects that we cover, from astronomy, space, aviation, weather, celebrity guests, and stories of American exceptionalism. If you're just joining us, Tom Harris, the Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition, is a friend of the show, and we appreciate his time. Thank you, Tom. Continue on with this whole story about, COP30. I mean, it's interesting. You have an article here that goes into great detail, and since radio is the theater of the mind, you show this big infographic about how these particular aircraft, how much pollutants they're putting in the air. And a little bit, if anybody even didn't have an opinion on climate science, they would say, wait a minute, this might sound very hypocritical if you're trying to control that. Talk about what the damage is to the atmosphere if you're going to try to stop CO2 with corporate jets coming in droves.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's crazy because one of the main themes of this meeting, the COP30 meeting, 30th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was established in Brazil, interestingly, in Rio in 1992. But if you bring in 60,000 delegates and you average a certain distance, averaging across the world, it turns out that the flying in is 69,000 tons of CO2 just from the airfare. And that's the equivalent of powering 30,000 homes for a year just to get the delegates there. And, if they're serious about reducing CO2, why do they need 60,000 delegates? I mean, it's completely crazy.
Yes, Tom, and couldn't they do this on Zoom meetings? I mean, to save the environment, if that's the main emphasis? I mean, I would think, I'm not even a scholar in this, just say, look, let's set up a big electronic, big station, have everybody come through the power of the internet. Wouldn't that be a viable solution?
Yeah, sure. You might have 10 people from each country that physically go there, and the rest of them join in by Zoom. But, you get countries like Canada, for example. We're sending about 500 delegates. 500 delegates. I mean, it's completely insane. Even the United States, with Trump not sending the top people, are still sending 100, because governors like Gavin Newsom are going, and, lots of the former head of the EPA, Gina McCarthy, she's going to be there, and lots of mayors of towns are getting there. And they're all going by first class and staying in at least 4-star hotels. So the amount of money is millions and millions of dollars per country. The thing that I got a laugh out of was that how many delegates would you guess Nigeria would send? Just a guess.
Oh, I don't know, maybe 500? No.
You're pretty close. They actually sent more than Canada by 536, I think it is.
Wow, I'm a pretty good guesser because remember, Tom, it's 5 o'clock somewhere for the happy hour down there, and I'm sure the drinks and the food. Hey, I'd love to be there just for the, entertainment and, of course, the great cuisine that I'm sure we would experience. But, Tom, something? It's always true to form. You always light up the phone lines here. So let's do that because we're inviting them into our family. Here on the Dr. Sky Experience, we say good morning to Philip in Memphis, Tennessee. Good morning. How are you this morning?
How are you, sir?
Doing well, sir.
This is a scam. It's just a ripoff. It's just a world tax. How in the world can we get this nonsense out of academia? That's where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Tom, you got the floor.
Getting it out of academia is going to be very hard because academia has been completely infected by woke agenda. You know, this postmodernism and critical theory, all that has totally inundated the universities all across the Western world. You know, from that point of view, the left have been incredibly successful by getting to our young people through the universities. When I taught my course at Carleton, the students were astounded. They had only been exposed to one side of this issue, and of course that is the same across all kinds of issues. And they actually had fun because, you know, we took apart the politically correct narrative. I'm happy that Trump is defunding some of these universities because they have become cesspools of political correctness. And, you know, I always say that these universities have become politically correct enforcers of group woke think, you know, or woke group think. Mm-hmm. They are not healthy, and it's one of the main causes of our problem.
Well, Philip, let me ask you a question if you're still with us. Have you always been on this side, or had you had a change of heart over the course of time? And to describe that, if you've always been steadfast about this being, you know, a scam and a fraud, describe a little more about your background. Have you always been on measure on this, or did you change at one point? I'm interested to hear that.
In the 70s, you heard people talking about they didn't want pollution. They were environmentalists. I went to school, and the preacher, and they're just phony professors preaching garbage to 19-year-olds.
Yeah,
it's more like indoctrination. And if anybody question them, they will fail you out of school.
You said it right, Philip, in Memphis, Tennessee. You're right. And, you know, it's interesting, this whole concept of critical thinking. I mean, it goes deep, maybe deeper than we want to go into it this morning. But in other words, if you're going to take a stand on something, defend it with facts, figures, and you know, information. Just don't go mob psychology on stuff. And Philip, I appreciate you, and I hope you'll be you'll be part of our program as we move through time and space. Here we go. Let's say good morning to Tony in Clifton, New Jersey. Good morning, Tony. You're on the Dr. Sky Experience. How are you doing?
Hi, Dr. Sky. Hi, Tom. Thank you for being on. You know, this is such an interesting topic because we learned so much from the Biden administration, things that we never paid attention to. And all the funding that he did really showed us. I mean, it was almost $1 trillion in his green energy deals I was reading. And a lot of it was politically based to sort of change our country and our whole free market enterprise, our whole energy and people, the oil. And what they didn't produce any oil in our country, and we had to buy it from other countries. Exactly, it really had a political motivation that was really to undermine our country. And I tell you, I wonder when they go before God how they're going to explain what they did to our country, because it's a shame, Tom. It really is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It is.
Well, you know, it's not so difficult to reduce real pollution like sulfur dioxide and particulates and things like that. But it's actually very difficult and very expensive to take carbon dioxide out of the effluents of, let's say, a coal station. And so that's one of the reasons why they've focused on reducing carbon dioxide, because it's hard to do. It actually makes coal and natural gas and oil much more expensive. And that's the goal. You see, I mean, carbon dioxide, there's no point in controlling it. It's not pollution. It's plant food. But it makes it much more expensive to use fossil fuels. And I think that is, in fact, their goal.
Well, Tony, I got to ask you a quick question here before we say thank you as always for joining us here. The electric bill situation, not just here, not just here in Arizona, not just across the country, but have you been adversely affected? I mean, it sounds very stupid maybe to ask that personally, but I'm hearing from so many people in New Jersey that these bills have just, gone 20-30% over what you had just a few years ago. How are you affected, if you don't mind sharing?
Yes, Dr. Sky, because I moved into a house from being in a condo and in 2022. And I would say in 22, 23, even in 24, nothing really hit that was very dramatic. I don't even think we had much of an increase. Something happened this year, and we're all getting slammed And it really is something that we've been going to our president to give the American people some relief, because this is really affecting the welfare of people, and it really does affect how they're going to vote, right?
Right. And I wonder what Governor-elect Mikey Sherrill is looking to do do that, because a lot of people I talk to in various parts of New Jersey all the time, friends and other family members, they're saying that Governor Murphy, present governor until the time it transitions, they're saying a lot of changes happened there. And I don't know why. I mean, do you even know why these bills went up? I mean, it sounds ridiculous, maybe foolish on my part, but I don't know. What are they doing to make them go up so high? Amazing.
I thought maybe it was because they were playing games with all our energy, and we weren't making, we were getting, now our gas prices, our gas at the pump prices are going down. I just figured they were manipulating our energy. I don't really know. I did want to tell you before I hang up that in 65, I was still in school. So when they had the blackout, I just remember them talking about it, that people were stuck in the subway.
Oh, I was there on the street. Yeah. It was bad. It was shocking for a 9-year-old. I was only 9, and I was like, wow, that's crazy. So you experienced it, and it all ties together, I think, right? Right, Tom? I mean, we're pulling this whole thing together. Overuse of the electric grid, if you depend on it, without some way of sustaining it. And, what are people going to do? Pay 300% what they were paying before? There has to be better answers.
Yeah, that's exactly the case, because in Ontario, before Dalton McGuinty came in, who was a premier, back around 2005, he said we were going to get rid of coal. And at that time, coal was 25% of our electricity, and we were using a lot of nuclear as well. We got rid of coal, and we didn't see a 30 or 40% rise like you're talking about. We saw a 200% rise since that period. And that's because we got because we're going to run the country or run the province on wind power, which is totally ludicrous, because, of course, it only gives, power at certain times when it's windy, and you had to have backup plants, which were running inefficiently.
It's not dependable at all. But, Tony, I hate to cut everybody short here. We're almost up at a break again. But, Tony and Clifton, thank you for being part of our show. You're a regular.
Thanks,
we appreciate
your
comment. Always have a good weekend. And, ladies and gentlemen, if we haven't gotten to Bob in Westchester, Alexi in Queens, and Robert in Montreal, Canada, we'll do our very best after we come back in just a moment from this break. But, Tom, this is interesting, and this whole electric thing is interesting. I've seen my own bills, go up, and I'm no different. I mean, I don't have an electric car anymore. We did have a Tesla at one time, and the reasons we didn't like it, I was a little particular about the seating in the model that we had. Not to say that Teslas are no good, but look at all the people that are depending on this, and look at these data centers that are being built, right? I mean, what are they doing? They're pulling in water. Yeah. They're pulling in all this electric, off the grid, the juices, we would call it. And then what's left for us? And you're right. Wind power. I'd have to agree. I don't think it's necessarily the answer, because if it's lack of dependability, what are we going to do? Spin the earth 2 times faster to make wind? That ain't going to happen, right?
And there's not enough rare earth elements and critical minerals available to have a full-blown transition anyway. And as we move towards that transition, we're becoming more and more dependent on China, because they produce 70% of mined rare earth elements, and 90% of the output, refined output, comes out at the other end. So we're becoming dependent more and more on China, which, of course, they love, because they power their country mostly with coal and then sell us all the renewable energy.
Wow. That's why we have great guests like Tom Harris and you, ladies and gentlemen, out there. 1-800-848-9222. We'll take that break, and we'll be right back on the Dr. Sky Experience.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
A foolish faith in authority is the worst enemy of the truth. A great quote by one of the great scientists that we talk about here in a different show on a different time, the great Albert Einstein. 47 minutes after the hour, Tom Harris is with us, and you, ladies and gentlemen, if you've been patient, and we appreciate you on the phone line, let's say good morning to Bob in Westchester. Bob, you're on with Tom Harris. How are you doing this morning?
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call.
Always
I've got a couple of things I want to mention. I talk to I've talked to a lot of people that are activists that I happen to know. And one of them he actually is an environmental engineer, and they're not even interested at all. There's a show called Expedition Unknown where he was looking, and there were 2 episodes about it. He was looking for a woolly mammoth because they wanted to find DNA they were going to clone.
Oh, wow.
And what he did was he went into 3 areas up north, the Yukon and Siberia and someplace else. And what he found was they were doing high-pressure mining for both gold and illegal ivory poaching. And they estimated that every single day they're using high-pressure hoses to destroy forests and to destroy 150,000 years of glaciers every day. The indigenous people up there, the indigenous people up there can't even use the underground caves they used to use to store their food all winter long. And, they seem so determined to shut down one, fossil fuels and encourage other businesses, but they don't really seem like, hey, look, you're presented with this fact and you don't even care about it.
Interesting.
Not you, them.
No, I understand clearly. Tom, I think what Bob is talking about is very interesting. It opens my mind, but please continue, Tom.
Yeah, for sure. And, we have to realize that a lot of the green energy transition that they're talking about actually damages the indigenous people's rights. For example, the batteries, okay? Joe Biden wanted us all to move to electric batteries, but he doesn't seem to realize that, the lithium triangle in South America, which is Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, it holds about 75% of the world's known lithium reserves. And they've been actually mining that lithium and taking the water away from the local people because they use about 2/3 of the water in many of those regions. So, you're right that we have to be careful that we're not destroying the things that we say we're trying to protect. They talk about protecting the environment and human rights and that sort of thing at these UN conferences. They say social justice is a major part of it. Well, if that were the case, they should move away from electric vehicles because, of course, the cobalt is mined in many cases by children as young as 4 years old in the Congo.
That's horrible.
So it's everything is going against what they say. It's funny, if they cared about social justice, they would want us to use the least expensive, most reliable sources of energy that we have right here in North America. We shouldn't have to be going all over the world to get it. So, Trump is completely on the right track, trying to make America, basically the world leader in energy.
Bob, if you have a closing comment, please continue.
Yeah, they've actually developed nuclear power plants that can actually use previously thought of spent rods.
Oh, right. Yeah,
and they won't. They just they refuse to give them a license to do it. Since Indian Point has been destroyed here where I live, my bill's going up 100%. It's going up 100% like overnight.
Oh, Bob, thank you for being part of the show. I hate to cut people short here. It's never my intention, but the clock rules everything, and that's not an excuse. It's a fact. But Bob, thank you. Your insightful comments appreciated, and I'm sure they're heard by many people on this great radio station. Let's see if we can go to the other callers, ladies and gentlemen. Let's say good morning to Robert in the beautiful city of Montreal, Canada. Robert, thank you for waiting.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I just want to point out that I remember 67 all right, and up here in Quebec, we have major sources of hydroelectric power, and as it stands now, we do have several sites that can be developed into major sources, like new major sources of electric power. And there's only one problem that I've been thinking about for a while, and that is the overpopulation of the world. There are just too many people, and they're using up the resources, and they're using up the forests. And the forests actually digest the carbon dioxide, as your guest can confirm, and that's an issue too. So I think that perhaps these wizards who are going down to South Africa can start talking about vasectomy in addition to everything else.
It's funny, Robert. No, Robert, you bring up a good point, and I don't want to sound sour grapes, but here in Arizona, no difference. I go to a place to shop, like everybody does occasionally, or more often than occasionally, and I pull into a place, I won't name the big wholesaler that's out there across the country and the world, and it took me forever to find the spot. And then some man comes over to my car and he looks at me and he's smiling. And I go, wow, that's unusual because usually people are angry. And he said, you know what? He didn't know my name. He said, nobody practiced birth control in the whole parking lot. And I was like, oh my gosh, that guy came out with a really powerful comment. But seriously, Robert, you bring up points that Tom, I'm sure, wants to address here. And interesting. Yeah, another fellow Canadian there right on the phone there, Tom.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I came from Montreal. I grew up in Pointe Claire. So, yeah, I miss Montreal. It's a gorgeous city. That's for sure.
I love
Very
it too.
interesting. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I grew up in northern Quebec, and my older brother and I used to go fishing next to the smaller hydroelectric dams, which they built because of the mining up there. And it was great, but we have real major projects now. And as you know, Alcoa is up here, and we're producing the best aluminum in the world. And unfortunately, President Trump has hit us with 50% tariffs, which is really hurting us. And but you guys, I mean, in the United States, President Trump needs our aluminum. And if we start to stockpile our aluminum and sell it out to the rest of the world, they may be short of aluminum for their major projects as well. So it's a two-way street.
We hope we can all get along there, Robert, in Canada. And I appreciate your time here. Let's move on because trying to get another caller in, at least to the top of the first hour here. Let's say good morning to Alexi in Queens. Alexi, good morning. You've been patient. How you doing, my friend?
Yeah, you always catch me at the end of the show. Listen, good morning to both of you. The problem is that the history of the world is very simple. You have people who are purporting all this gloom and doom, these liberal professors and so-called scholars and PhDs who propagate all this information about the end of the world and the oceans overtaking the land and the ice melting and the penguins flying south and all this nonsense. What they don't understand is that not one of them has stepped forward to challenge the things that are causing all these environmental changes. Apropos to your last caller before me, he mentioned Africa. In the country of Nigeria, the population now, it's less than the size of the state of Texas. 206 million people. Would you believe it?
No, my gosh. That's incredible. Yeah. Yeah,
and they're breeding like crazy. And they are overtaking the land. They are destroying the land, building buildings and such to improve the economy. No, there is no preventative, no forethought in the way that the human progress. We have survived thousands of plagues, epidemics, wars, and conflicts, whatever.
Alexi, this is interesting, and I want Tom to corroborate this. Isn't there something, Tom, and Alexi called the Malthusian theory, in which what happens? The population grows at this exorbitant rate, and the food supply doesn't grow in anywhere near proportion. Do I have that right, gentlemen? I read that once I took an economics class. Right.
Yeah, that's right. But it's turned out to be wrong because, in fact, we have an intelligence capability of overwhelming that. And, you know, it's true that parts of the world, of course, have really serious pollution and overpopulation problems. But generally speaking, I mean, humans are incredibly adaptable. So, I mean, we have the ability to solve these problems. We just have to stop wasting our money on stupid things. You know, one of the things that a water resources expert told me, he said, you realize that as the climate scare sucks all the money away from real environmental issues, you can't solve the pollution problems that exist because you're all focused on this silly climate stuff. You know, he said that as you saw, you know, the funding in Canada, for example, go through the roof on climate, the funding for water resources, which is a real issue, groundwater and rivers and things, the funding for that has gone down. So I think one of the most important things that has to happen is environmentalists have to kick the climate activists out of the movement because they're taking away from real environmental concerns like was just mentioned.
Interesting. Alexi, you get the last word. We've got about a minute, and that's the time we allocate, not because we don't like you. We certainly love you and your conversation. Please continue.
The point is that the human race will not perish from plague, famine, volcanoes, or nuclear war. These are all nothing. The human race will destroy itself probably another 100, 200 years. I say because of the nature of these people. Everything is doom and gloom. 99% of all these prophecies will never come to fruition. And what we need to get them away from the government, because they are forcing the arm of the government to straddle us with regulations and craziness that will eventually culminate in the destruction of this country.
Well, Alexi, we have to leave it at that because that's what the time permits, but always insightful commentary that you bring to the table. And I want to, as we close this hour, we continue, of course, with Tom Harris, Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. If you're looking for his website, it is ics-canada.com. And ladies and gentlemen, from my side to you, everybody out there, I'm sure, all humans want this: freedom, prosperity, and peace. And Tom, who would argue with that, right? That's exactly what every human wants. But how do we get it if many people believe, and they're certainly correct, the population of the earth is growing at such exponential rate? And what do we do about it? If we feed people, how do we feed them? How do we get along? How do we prevent wars? Subjects and topics that are very deep. But we, appreciate everybody's insightful comments. Stay with us, ladies and gentlemen, for hour number 2. We get deeper into the subject. Tom Harris has many, many things to share with you. And your opinions, ladies and gentlemen, are equally important. I mean that. Radio is what? Theater of the mind. And we just ask that we try to do it in dialogue. And, of course, with critical thinking. 1-800-848-9222. We'll see you in just a few moments with hour number 2.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
The mind-opening experience, the Dr. Sky Experience, continues here on Talk Radio 77 WABC with hour number 2 at 5 minutes after the hour. Continuing with our very special guest, Tom Harris, the Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. His website, ladies and gentlemen, is icsc-canada.com. Plethora of information there that you can, of course, check out at your convenience 24/7 as we talk with him about what's really going on behind the scenes as he follows this very, very intensively. Welcome back. I appreciate you. And one of the things I always like to do for this audience, and people tell me they enjoy that part, so here we go. We give them a little bit of a sky update. As we move deeper, ladies and gentlemen, into the month of November, just know that on the surface of the sun, very much related to the topics that we're talking about right now, 2 very powerful solar flares were exhibited on the sun and appeared on the surface of the sun just a few days ago from a sunspot group called Active Region 4274. And if you're really inclined to want to find out more about this, we recommend you go to spaceweather.com. On the left side of the page, ladies and gentlemen, you will see a live image of the sun, safe for your eyes on your screen, a most massive sunspot group that is literally belching out. And who knows what could happen in the next few days, not to sound alarmist, the sights of the beautiful northern lights, the Aurora Borealis, and in other parts of the world in the southern hemisphere. And also, get set for a meteor shower. Maybe it won't be a storm as we move into the early part of next week, into the weekend of next week, the annual Leonid meteor shower peaking on the morning of November 17th. That indeed, ladies and gentlemen, something that, as I mentioned in our previous program, before he was President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln experienced one of these massive storms from the Leonids in the year 1833. All these meteors are brought to us by comets, but continuing on with Tom Harris. Tom, we were talking about maybe the failure of the electric grid and how sensitive that electric grid is. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's go back in our time machine here on WABC. 60 years ago, November the 9th at 5:25 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, here is what it sounded like on WABC in part.
Everything sounds like it's running in slow motion here. I know what's going on. It is, too. This is a very lazy river. Side-tenders band to take us up the news time. The lights are dimming in the studio. You wouldn't believe what's going on in the studio, folks. The lights are getting dim. The electricity is slowing down. I didn't know that could happen. This is a big room on WABC. lazy river in the key of R. Everything's running slowly. Somebody's, I think Con Ed's having power problems or something because everything's running at half speed, including me. Hey, listen, we got Action Central News next, and then right after another complete edition of Action Central News, we shall return with the number 10 goodie by Herbie Albert and Tijuana Brass called Taste of Honey, honey. Sure.
This is Bill Rice with news 5 minutes sooner from WABC Radio.
That's what it was like, ladies and gentlemen. I experienced it. Maybe you too did in that most amazing event. But seriously, as people described it on television at the time, there was a lot of civility there that night. There weren't riots. And then, ladies and gentlemen, it seemed like many people simply got along. Tom Harris, isn't that interesting? Did you experience it? As you mentioned before, you were what? A little older than me. You said you were like 12 years of age. Wow.
Yeah, that's right, in Montreal. But, we're actually headed towards more blackouts if we continue with this green energy expansion. A good example is just look at Texas. Back a couple of years ago when they had that massive blackout, when the weather was as cold in Dallas, Texas, as it was, in the Yukon. I mean, it was an unusual circumstance. And the whole reason why they had the blackout, the primary reason, was because they became too reliant on wind power. And the wind was providing about half of the electricity before the storm hit. But when the storm hit, the wind died, and it got very cold, and then they lost all that electricity. And that's when they had up to 700 people die because they were relying on a source of energy that died. Very sad.
Interesting. No, you bring up some good points. And talking about the electric grid here, we're mentioning even the most extreme example, which may happen, pray to God it doesn't. Electromagnetic pulse weapons detonated into the atmosphere. What is that, in case people don't know? Small yield or a high yield nuclear weapon detonated above the United States could do what? Catastrophic damage, not just to the United States, Canada, all of North America. Something that I don't want to alarm people. But the point of the matter is we talk about these things because there's a hell of a lot of stress, simply, as we have overstated, on the electric grid. But what's the solution? I think some of our callers were talking about maybe the reuse of small, nuclear devices, power stations in the nuclear side, but so many people don't want that from the other side. The environmentalists are dead set against any additional nuclear power plants. I think I'm correct on that. You tell us more.
Yeah, it's a really strange situation. They want to get rid of carbon dioxide, and yet they're not going to use the main source of energy that produces no carbon dioxide, which is nuclear power. I mean, these small modular reactors that are going to be coming online around the world soon are really fantastic. I mean, they don't necessarily need the kind of cooling that you need for a big reactor. So that means with these small modular reactors, they call them SMRs, they can put them in the Arctic. They can put them in the middle of the prairies. A town like Ottawa, where I live, has 1 million people. We could power the whole city with a nuclear small modular reactor, one of them on each of the 4 sides of the city, and we would get clean, zero carbon dioxide energy. Yet you're right, the environmentalists are paranoid about the waste, which of course we can talk about because it's not really a serious issue.
Well, take a look at nuclear submarines. I mean, I'm not the expert on this. We had many people who were undersea for like 70, 80 days, and they talked about as little they can tell me because it's classification. But some of these small yield, Westinghouse nuclear reactors on submarines, we haven't seen catastrophic damage. Maybe 1 or 2 submarines have imploded, like the Thresher, other disasters, but that seems to work. So the same kind of a nuclear reactor, could safely be placed and generate a hell of a lot of energy, more than we're getting from wind power.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And the number of people who've died from nuclear accidents in North America is a big fat 0. None. And yet you have lots of people who've died because of black lung disease from coal or from other troubles with, gas. I mean, nuclear power is the safest form of energy by far. It doesn't involve flooding complete valleys, and so, I mean, in the long run, I'm talking about, say, 200 or 300 years, I think the world will run on nuclear power.
Yes, and let's not, discount the other possibility of development of nuclear, the fusion side of reactors, which a lot of people from the Princeton Advanced, Science Laboratories, China's developing these tokamak reactors. Imagine that. And if people are not familiar with that, the research, of course, you can do on your own, folks. And it's interesting because those small fusion reactors, the power of the sun, in essence, conversion of massive amounts of hydrogen into helium, the whole fusion process, you could what, Tom? You could light up a whole city with something maybe as small as a refrigerator, if that was able to contain. There's just so much energy and heat coming out of that. I guess that's the issue. Sustaining the heat and controlling it so it doesn't go outside of the box, so to speak, right?
Yeah, they have to hold it for a certain amount of time at very, very high temperatures. So they're using magnetic confinement where they hold it. And so the real goal of all of this research is to hold that super high temperature long enough for the fusion reaction to occur, and hold it, safely. But, even with today's fission reactors, you have to realize that the high-level waste produced in a fission reactor is very, very small. If you were to get all of your electricity for your entire life for an average American from nuclear power, the amount of high-level waste would be about the size of a golf ball.
Wow, interesting.
It's very, very tiny. Now, of course, there's other waste, which is low-level waste, things like gloves or other things that have been radiated, but that is not a very dangerous source of energy. In fact, in many cases, you can prevent it from, flowing in a certain area with a piece of paper. So the dangerous waste that you have to control and you have to, somehow contain is high-level waste, and that's a very small amount. But, you have to realize that it decays very, very quickly. So it becomes safe within a few centuries. In Canada, for example, a CANDU nuclear reactor bundle, you could hold it in your hands safely after only 400 years. Now, 400 years is a blink of an eye geologically. So if you stick it in a 1 million year old geologic formation,
sure,
it's going to be safe within no time geologically.
So the next time you go visit, ladies and gentlemen, being facetious, your local nuclear reactor, if you can find one, and you go inside the operations center, look down there from the protective glass, and you want to see inside the rods that are in water this blue glow. It's called Cherenkov radiation, and that's a long story to explain. But what you don't want to see is no water, right, in the rods. That could be catastrophic. So you must maintain the water, and the blue glow needs to be there. Cherenkov radiation. How about that?
Yeah, and cool. People have to realize that the big events that happened, at Chernobyl, for example, could not happen. It's physically impossible to happen in North America. And there are a lot of reasons. First of all, it was a terrible design. The technicians were negligent. But the main reason is that it was a graphite fire. Normally you have to somehow slow down the neutrons so that the reaction continues a chain reaction. And in North America, we use water as a moderator. And in Russia, they were using graphite, and the graphite caught fire. The graphite caught fire, so that cannot happen in North America. It's physically impossible, and yet the sad thing is, because of the Chernobyl accident, it actually led to a complete slowdown of the whole North American nuclear industry. People just didn't understand that it was a different technology. It could not happen here.
Well, education is the prima facie thing, and that's what we try to do on the Dr. Sky Experience, and giving everybody an opportunity to express their own opinion. And certainly we like critical thinking. And if you're one of those out there in radio land, ladies and gentlemen, Theater of the Mind in this early morning or still on the West Coast, as we continue to be late into Saturday night, the contact number, 1-800-848-9222, 1-800-848-9222. This is very interesting, and you're also talking about on this particular archive that we share with you, and you share with us, about talking about a list of the actual high and low temperatures that have been recorded, the National Weather Service and others, that people really should take a look at this, because don't be alarmist. There have been times, and I'm looking at some of this data for New York. I'm doing this for Arizona, where I am, and everybody can go check it out. But what does it do, Tom? It explains that the highs and lows and temperatures, snow depths, minimum temperatures, and many of these were a long, long time ago, before before people were even so concerned about so-called climate change in a negative way. Talk about it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. They keep track of the highest temperature, the lowest temperature, the most rain, the biggest hailstone, the strongest winds, the deepest snow, all that. They keep that. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration keeps that data for every state in the Union. Now, in 1936, they set 27 extreme weather records that still stand today. How many records do you think were set in 2024?
Yeah, I get it. And here, just to give an example for everybody listening out there, in New York, the snow depth, the highest recorded, and hopefully I'm reading this right off the website, the snow depth with 119 inches. Here's the date, folks, April 20th, 1943, at a location called Whiteface Mountain. In New York, the state, the 24-hour snowfall, all-time record, 50 inches, February 1, 1966, and in that town called Camden. And then in New York, I'll just give a few examples here, 24-hour of precipitation, 13.57 inches of rain occurred in a 2-day stretch from August 12th to the 13th in 2014, measured at Long Island's MacArthur Airport. Now, I didn't know if that's a hurricane that came through. We don't know. But the minimum temperature, one more only, that was ever recorded in New York State, this is interesting, minus 52 degrees Fahrenheit, February the 18th, 1979, in Old Forge, New York. So even some of those records go back into the 1920s, the 1910s. So where was the climate scare then?
Yeah. And the last year, the answer to my question was there were 0 extreme weather records set on a statewide basis. It's interesting. I just did a search, a sorting of that data table that you have there, and I sorted it on maximum temperature, and it lists all the states alphabetically: Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, etc. And the times that the maximum temperatures occurred were, and I'll just read the first few: 1925, 1915, 1994. That's reasonably recent. 1936. 1913, 1916. The temperature, there is no validity to the idea that extreme weather is increasing, because this is the best database in the world, and it doesn't show that.
Wow. And going on with the state that I'm in Arizona, the maximum temperature, ouch, folks, 128 degrees Fahrenheit. I remember the date. I was actually there, June 29th, 1994, Lake Havasu City, right along the Colorado River. And then if you think Arizona can only be heat, take a load of that, get a load of this. The minimum temperature, minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, January 7th, 1971, at a place in the mountains called Holy Lake. So the point we're making, I think we're doing a good job on it and people understand it, is that way before we had, quote, scares of climate change, and we're not dismissing the fact that we want to be polluters. The fact is that these records stand, and some of them continue to stand today, as you've heard. Right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. 1913, 134 degrees in California.
Wow.
134. Wow. But that was 1913, so that was in Death Valley, by the way. But yeah, it's just not there. People point to cities and they say, oh, look, this city is setting a record. Well, of course, because cities create what they call an urban heat island, and cities are growing. And as the city grows, it gets hotter because you're replacing forests with parking lots and things. So it makes more sense to look at a bigger area, in this case, a whole state. And what that shows is that extreme weather is not increasing. That's just simply not true.
Well, I thought gas pricing abuse. We're talking about Death Valley. I remember I went there, I think it was 2009, and you kept, if anybody's been there, if you haven't, here's a quick story. You keep driving down and down through these windy roads, and you get down to this Furnace Creek area, and you see this giant sign with a big digital display. That wasn't the problem. The gas station that I went into, this is back, I believe, in 2009, the regular price for non-premium gas was $7.80, and premium, you better forget that. It was like $9 a gallon. Wow. They could get away with it because you're in Death Valley. There you go.
Yeah, there's no gas station to compete with them.
And it was hotter than hell, not to be overly dramatic. There you go.
Yeah.
1-800-848-9222. Tom Harris is our special guest. Here, I want to go back to the New York City market here, our home. And I want to just ask you about something that happened not too long ago. Climate Week in New York City, around what, Tom? The time of the big UN event. Talk about some of the things that they were proposing, some of the things that came out of that. And are we still, not in agreement, that is, the world, on what came out of that particular Climate Week in New York City?
Yeah, that was a massive event. They had almost 1,000 different events across the city. And, of course, they want to lead the world on trying to stop climate change, so they made it happen at the same time as the UN General Assembly. And what they want to do, of course, is to power the world with wind and solar power, which is completely insane. You cannot do it. And, they wanted us to stop flying, and they want us to move to electric vehicles, et cetera. So it's really a fantasy. The things they're trying to do are not possible. And they're not even necessary anyway, because we don't have a climate emergency. One thing that people don't realize, somebody was saying in a previous call that, forests are disappearing all over the world. Well, actually, that's not true. We've become a lot more efficient in our farming. And so, believe it or not, there are more forests now in New England than there were at the time of the Civil War. Okay, so a lot of the doom and gloom that we hear from people is simply not true if you dig into the data. And, but we get a lot more reports of extreme weather because a lot more people have cell phones. And when there's a tornado in Oklahoma back in 1920, perhaps nobody saw it. Now we have hundreds of people videotape it. And so we think there's more extreme weather because we hear about it more often. But when you actually look at the data for all of these different parameters, I've never seen a field where every single concern is wrong, whether it's sea level or ocean acidification or temperature or extreme weather or polar bears or ice. Every single thing that they say is wrong. It's quite astonishing, actually, that they could make so many mistakes. You think even if they were trying to make mistakes, they couldn't make that many. Like, the whole thing has just become lunacy.
I agree. And I think many of our listeners out there might agree. But, ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to the table here. And at the table, if you certainly do disagree, but we like it in critical thinking. That's what we're trying to ask everybody out there. And Tom, not to put you on the spot, but define the pathways to critical thinking. I mean, you're a person who teaches. You're at the college level for many, many years, and maybe even still. Define to us the whole concept of critical thinking, just in case people go, well, critical thinking, mean I have to be critical of somebody on the radio? Or no, it's certainly not that. Describe it so we can understand it better.
Well, yeah, and we have to even take a step back before that and understand that what science is. I mean, science is not truth. Science is, in fact, trying to interpret our observations of nature and fit them into some sort of a theory that we can use to forecast the future. And that is really important for people to understand. And when they do understand that, it makes them a lot less kind of dogmatic about their point of view. Because, it's interesting, Plato defined truth as something that was universal, necessary, and certain. It had to happen everywhere. It was true here. It was true on Mars. It was true on Alpha Centauri. It had to be necessary. 2 + 2 = 4. That's truth. And it had to be certain. There's no doubt. It was in the bank. Okay? The queen moves in a certain way on the chessboard, and that is truth. Now, the thing about science is that we don't have truth in science because everybody interprets different things in different ways. Okay, this goes back to Bacon's Idols of the Mind, and he talks about the fact that, you have certain observational evidence and you interpret it in a way that's dependent on your education and your upbringing and all sorts of things. So I could look at a certain pile of data and say, oh, wow, I see certain things, and somebody else would say something totally different. So we have to realize that science is not about truth. It's about our current interpretation based on the data we have. And when we realize that, we tend to be a lot less dogmatic. People considered Newton, for example, as the pinnacle of scientific achievement. And for centuries, he was considered infallible until Einstein came along and showed that under certain circumstances, he was wrong. And in fact, it's funny because I actually visited Einstein's office in Princeton. They've kept it set up. Yeah, they've kept it set up exactly the way it was when he died. And it's really cool.
Oh, I thought you said you visited him when he was alive. I didn't know that.
Oh, no, I was only 2 when he died, so I couldn't have visited him. Jay Lair did, my co-host, that was on my show.
That's amazing.
He went to Princeton. Yeah. But the thing that's interesting is Einstein recognized that he was actually breaking with tradition. And so he had a picture of Newton on the wall, and apparently he said, please forgive me, Sir Isaac. Now, even Einstein now is shown to be not necessarily correct in some things.
That's the quantum physics. That's quantum. You know, we're going to have to cut it for this moment because the big break in radio continues. But the quote I made before, or read the quote that I read before, and the quote was, "A foolish faith in authority is the worst enemy of truth." This goes to what we're talking about in so many ways, part and parcel. Very important conversation, but what's more important, ladies and gentlemen, is your participation with your commentary and questions. And let me say this. If you do have reasons that you disagree with certain content here, provide us with some information that we can, of course, have in a dialogue in which we can discuss it openly and with critical thinking. And we'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen, here on the Dr. Sky Experience on the Powerhouse Radio Station, Talk Radio 77 WABC.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
The important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. Another quote from the great Albert Einstein. We welcome you back, ladies and gentlemen, at 33 minutes after the hour as we move through deep into the dark of the night here on hour number 2 of the Dr. Sky Experience. Our special guest, in case you're just tuning in, Tom Harris. He's a regular with us. We appreciate him, and we call him a friend and part of our family. He's the executive director of the International Climate Science Coalition, and he's with us, ladies and gentlemen, on a regular basis to talk about what's going on behind the scenes. Many may agree with what he's saying, and many may not. But again, Tom, welcome back. And the whole concept of critical thinking, it's a pretty deep process, but I didn't really give you a full chance to explain it. So please continue on.
Yeah, sure. I mean, critical thinking is the ability to analyze information, to evaluate evidence, and to form reasoned judgments. You know, and a really key part of it is open-mindedness. You have to be willing to consider that you might be wrong. There could be different perspectives or viewpoints that, you know, are actually more valid if you learn more information. And that's what happened to me when I visited this scientist's laboratory. At least I had an open mind. I mean, Zig Ziglar, you remember the professional speaker? I met him at... Yeah, I went to one of his talks when he came to Canada. I met him. He's a wonderful guy.
He could teach you how to sell anything. That was the guy.
Yeah. He said it's not that people have the wrong idea. He said that's not the problem. He says the real problem is that people's minds are like concrete. They're all mixed up and permanently set. And that's the issue that we have to fight, is the idea that they know what's right and they are impervious to anything to convince them otherwise. Because, you know, the bottom line is I think we all want, or most people want, what's good for our children, what's good for the environment. And so keeping an open mind to the possibility that you might be wrong, that coal actually might be a great energy source, that maybe there is no serious climate change that we have to worry about. If you keep your mind open, then the opportunity exists for you to actually learn more and change your opinion as you learn more.
Well, here, let's go to this particular question from me, and hopefully the audience will join us in their opinion. But let's say you're somebody who's on the borderline on this, and you say, well, you know, I don't know if everything Tom's saying I agree with. Everybody has a right to agree or disagree. But here, what can we say? What can you say to this audience about ways that we can actually effect change here and do it in a peaceful way, if that's even possible, and I hope and pray to God it is? Give us some positives about how we can, of course, come to the table and maybe solve this problem. And I don't like the overly used expression, you know, meet in the middle of the aisle or whatever. What are some of the things that are helpful that people can take to, you know, and be more positive about all the stuff that's going on?
Yeah, that's right. There is one element of the climate scare that does make sense. And it's important for us to recognize that, to be intellectually honest. And that is the idea that we should help people adapt to climate change. You know, communities throughout history that did not adapt, like the Vikings in Greenland, they died out and they're no longer with us. Okay, climate changes all the time. The only constant about climate is change. So we should be prepared to, for changes to occur. And so if we're going to help developing countries, we should help them prepare for inevitable change. Now, that's the thing, I think, where we can actually have some agreement with the climate activists. You know, unfortunately, of the $3 billion a day, believe it or not, that's being spent on the climate issue across the world, only about 10, 12% of it is being spent on adaptation. Most of it's being wasted on this idea that we control the climate. So, what I'm hoping comes out of this Brazil conference is that they have more of a focus on what Bill Gates was saying, namely help people improve their lives, overcome disease and become more energy rich so they can actually do things to improve their lives. So, and also adapt to climate change and get ready for it, because it's coming one way or the other. It's going to get hotter. It's going to get colder. It's going to get more rain, etc. These things will happen because that's part of the earth. Okay. And so we have to also recognize that the cooling historically has been much, much more dangerous to humans than the warming. It's interesting. The Lancet magazine, or Lancet journal, I should say, it's a leading medical journal out of the UK. They did an analysis of millions of deaths across dozens of countries, and they found that something like 20 times more people die from the cold than from the heat. So, yeah, we should agree with the alarmists that you need to prepare for climate change, but recognize that the real danger is cooling. And that might happen if the sun goes into a grand solar minimum around the middle of the century. And you know more about that than me, probably.
Well, let me put it this way. I'm not the expert on it, but I can just say this way. There is direct correlation, ladies and gentlemen. I think most people recognize this, by solar cycles. And the interesting part is, which is really deep here, and we may not have time to go through all of this, the Earth has had this most amazing ability to heal itself. Not an excuse to say, don't worry about it. Just pump mercury into the rivers. The Earth will take care of it. But being serious on this, look at all these mass extinctions that have happened in history. And I got to ask you this. The solar thing, of course, the 11 or so-called 12-year solar cycle is really not. It's a much bigger subset, and we could go into that in other shows. But what I want to drive at here is, when you take a look at this, how do you define the propensity of volcanic ash over the course of time? Isn't volcanism one of the major pollutants in the world to change the course of these mass extinctions or be the cause of them? What I'm saying in simple English, the output of volcanoes over the course of time has been what? One of the biggest polluters? Correct or not correct, Tom?
Oh, yes, correct. And in fact, the Tambora explosion, the eruption, and various eruptions throughout history have caused really, mass pollution around the world. Sunsets that were all kinds of spectacular colors, and it actually cooled the Earth for a couple of years. Right. Yeah, exactly. And it cooled the Earth for a couple of years. And the other thing that people say, volcanoes only put out a small fraction of the CO2 that humans do. It's not really true, because, that's true if you just look at the central core of a volcano, but all around the edges, miles away from the central core, are things they call fumaroles, which are cracks. And from those cracks comes a lot of CO2. And some of the scientists out of Sweden, for example, believe that if you actually add up all the associated fumaroles around a volcano, it actually does put out more CO2 than humans.
Very well said.
The bottom line, so the bottom line is that volcanoes are a major driver of climate change. And, sadly, you'd laugh, they're actually trying to simulate volcanoes by putting particulate matter high into the atmosphere. You can pay a certain amount of money. I can't remember the name of the company, but there's a company operating right now who you pay a certain amount of money to them, and they put into the atmosphere particulates from balloons, which actually supposedly cancel your carbon dioxide warming effect. Now, that can be very dangerous, because if they want to do it on a global scale, with thousands of aircraft all over the world in what they call geoengineering, we could actually trip the Earth into the next glacial by purposely causing cooling. So, I don't want to do that, In Canada, where I live right now, there was 2 kilometers of ice over my head. And so, the last thing we should do is play God with the climate.
Well, Tom, let's go back to the Krakatoa explosion. This is interesting. If you're a big fan of rock concerts and you got stuck in seat number 1 and it was a super loud rock band, or who knows, they say that those sounds can be deafening, of course, and damage to your ears, jet engines, of course. But according to many reliable sources, the loudest, or one of the loudest acoustic sounds ever produced on the Earth was the explosion of Krakatoa allegedly 40 miles away, eardrums were blown. And if they have accurate readings, they're saying it was over 325 decibels. Can you imagine that? From the earth producing all that sulfur dioxide, it literally vaporized that entire little island, I guess. That's incredible.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. It makes the concerts by The Who, which hold the record, the Guinness Book of Records for the loudest rock band in history, it makes them seem pretty quiet.
Or the heavy metal bands, right. There you go.
Yeah.
1-800-848-9222 as we take you deeper into your morning here on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Ladies and gentlemen, your opportunity to share experience in critical thinking. If you choose to do that, we hope you do. Our special guest, Tom Harris, talking about things that you may not hear in other forms of broadcast during the normal daytime day part. Because why, Tom? We have the opportunity now to take these subjects and go out there and what? Hopefully expand our knowledge and expand our minds. But of all these mass extinctions, and I won't go through each one of them. I mean, you know about it. Many people may also know about them. We find out the incredible cleansing effect that the earth has had over the course of millions and billions of years. So what, in simple terms, we get just a couple of minutes before the break, what do you consider to be the response to that? How does the earth do that over time? I'm confused on that. Help us out.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have a self-correcting influence. You know, the atmosphere and the earth itself is actually very robust. You know, most feedbacks are not such that they amplify the original effect. You know, like, for example, they say that, yes, it's true that the warming effect of carbon dioxide is quite small, but it causes more water vapor to evaporate, and water vapor is a greenhouse gas, and that amplifies the original warming, and that's where you get the problem. The trouble is nature doesn't generally work that way. Nature generally has negative feedbacks, where the more you do something, you get a result that dampens that effect. And so Pat Michaels, he's passed away now, but he was a climatologist in Virginia. He said, no, the fragile earth sort of paradigm is wrong. The earth is very robust. It's able to actually make changes to itself that keep the earth from having a runaway greenhouse like it did on Venus.
Well, that's amazing. As we go to that break, Tom Harris, we consider, ladies and gentlemen, a most interesting opportunity here, and your questions and comments still as we move to the top of hour number 2, deeper into your morning at 1-800-848-9222.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
If everyone is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. A quote from General George S. Patton a long time ago at 46 minutes after the hour, not only discussing critical thinking, ladies and gentlemen, but some of the effects that Tom Harris says may not necessarily be true when it comes to the so-called climate scare. So you're saying before at the top of the program, in your opinion, through research, not just, knee-jerk reaction, that the climate scare, in your opinion, through research, is dying. Talk more about it.
Yeah, for sure. I think people are being forced to be more realistic instead of idealistic because they need inexpensive energy. People in Texas undoubtedly are a lot more realistic now than they were before the 2021 blackout that killed 700 of them, because they're recognizing that, look, you don't have power when there's no wind or no solar if you rely on those energy sources. So we're seeing in Europe, for example, there's a move back to coal. They're reopening a lot of the old stations that were turned off. The data center companies, the people that are building AI centers, they are starting to buy and reopen some of the old stations. For example, they want to reopen 3 Mile Island. They want to actually get back to really dependable power. As long as this was just an ideological crusade, oh my God, save the earth, then people could go along with it. But when they say, but you're going to now get blackouts, you're going to now have food prices that go through the roof, then people take a step back and they say, is this really necessary? And all of the climate scare, and I mean all of it, is based, the only foundation of it is the computer models. So the natural question is, do the computer models work? In other words, if you go 30 years into the past and you plug in the temperature that existed at the time, and then you input the carbon dioxide increase since that time, do you get today's temperature? Well, the answer is no. In fact, it's overestimating temperature rise by something like 200% on average. So if the only foundation of the climate scare is computer models that don't work, well, if your investment analyst was doing that, I think you'd fire them.
Yeah. It's very interesting. And as we end the show in just a few moments here, ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted our special guest, Tom Harris, to talk about this. I'm not a big fan of Bill Gates, nor do I dislike him. But the reality is he's made many statements in the past that had obviously some challenge to it, or many people agreed with him. Here's what you're talking about. Bill Gates is changing his ideas on climate change. Extrapolate on that so people can understand just what the heck that means.
Right. Well, he's being influenced by Bjorn Lomborg, and in fact, he's helping fund Bjorn Lomborg. And Lomborg says that, and I don't agree with him on this aspect, but at least it's more sensible than the complete alarmist point of view. He says, yeah, climate change is a serious issue. However, there are much more important things to do in the world than worrying about a degree or two rise. And Bill Gates now is saying exactly the same thing. He's saying, look, if I can solve malaria, and I can accept a little bit of a temperature rise if, in fact, the money goes to solving malaria instead of, trying to reduce temperature. But Gates has a vested interest, obviously, because he wants to have the power for these AI data centers and things like that. So, the climate scare is hitting the hard edge of reality. That's, I think, what's really happening, is that many people are starting to realize that if they follow the climate scare to its sort of logical conclusion, although the whole thing's illogical, what you end up cold, hungry, and freezing in the dark, and bankrupt at the same time. So that's a really good incentive to sort of look at the science and say, well, are you sure about this? And the consensus of world scientists does not say what they're saying. Most people in the scientific community say, wow, this is an incredibly complex field. We cannot forecast climate in the distant future. And that's sort of obvious in a way, because if we can't determine next week's weather with regular then how the heck are we going to determine, climate in the year 2050? So we really simply don't know. But, one thing I gotta point out, which is quite fun, is Al Gore is going to the conference in Brazil. Okay. And have you heard of the Al Gore effect?
No, please explain it to our vast audience. This is important.
Okay. Yeah, it is. It's a statistical coincidence that where Al Gore goes, it gets cooler. And when I went to the Copenhagen conference in 2009, it's just a statistical correlation. It's not cause and effect. But regardless, when I went to the Bella Center where they had the conference in 2009, the big Copenhagen consensus or Copenhagen conference, there were estimated 30,000 people registered. Now, the UN didn't think that number would come, but they did. And the Bella Center couldn't actually, couldn't hold them all. So they turned away thousands of delegates from, poor African countries who'd stood in line in the freezing cold because the Al Gore effect was in full blast, coldest they had in decades. They stood in line for 8 hours or so and they didn't get in. So the funny thing is, I'm sure many of the protesters on the street were just delegates who were angry that they couldn't get into the conference. But the Al Gore effect is funny because statistically, if you want to solve global warming, then we should send Al Gore all over the world.
There you go, my friend. Very well said. From Tom Harris, our special guest, his website, once again, is icsc-canada.com. We implore you to go out there at your convenience, to check out all the things that he has to say there. And this is fascinating, too, as we end this particular program in just a few moments, talking with you about these subjects, trying to find solutions that people can agree on. And, we've heard throughout various callers throughout the 2 hours, population explosion. And I want you to see, and again, I'm reaching kind of far and wide here on this, the connection to the globalist agenda, if many people believe that all this, once again, is nothing more than a trick to, have everybody on planet number 3 conform to a global government. Describe that without me sounding paranoid, and certainly your opinion on how that goes out, even to deeper subjects in the future.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there are a lot of drivers of the climate scare, but clearly one of them is the drive for world government. Okay. In fact, it's interesting. A previous environment minister in Canada said that the Kyoto Protocol, which is a predecessor of the Paris Agreement, was the flagship of world governance, because these people believe that the world is better run by government. And if we can get the whole world into one government, then supposedly we'll be a lot better off. And, it's interesting because the climate scare, actually, you can see how it would lead to a world government, because if there were a climate emergency and you had to control world carbon dioxide emissions, since 80% of the energy in the world is fossil fuels, it would mean that you'd have to control the world's energy. And if you control the world's energy, you essentially control the world. So in that sense, you would have a global government. And so that is certainly one of the drivers behind the climate issue. Yes. And the other point, of course, is that they think government runs the world better than private enterprise. So if you move over to wind and solar power, which require government subsidies to just survive, then again, government takes over. So these are objectives that many of these people have, because they may not know anything about the science, but they can see, this is a way to get world government and make the government in charge of more and more of our lives. If you let coal companies, for example, do what they do, they don't require government support because they make money and they produce useful products without any of our government. So it's actually a drive towards world socialism is what it really is.
And people need to know this again. I'll repeat it. You've said it, and I will just clarify it. Knowles' law of media accuracy is the idea, quote, everything you read in the newspapers is absolutely true, except for the rare story of which you happen to have first-hand knowledge, end quote. Very well, because don't believe everything you read, but then again, well, there's more to it than that particular story. And another one of our favorite guests, Tom, is also Patrick Wood, and he'll be continuing with us as we move through other iterations of the Dr. Sky experience. His website, technocracy.news. Why am I mentioning him right now? Because his whole story of technocracy, and as you talk about here with the International Climate Science Coalition, I think there's very interesting correlations of two rails on a railroad track going in the same direction to offer people what? Ideas to how to open our minds on these subjects. People can disagree. But again, I really appreciate your time on this. You get the last word here. We got about 2 minutes, so take the floor, please.
Yeah, sure. One thing I noticed in the media coverage of this event is that the Amazon was the lungs of the earth. Okay? They're saying this all over the place. They're saying it in PBS. They're saying it in the Globe and Mail in Canada. They're saying it in Europe. They're saying it everywhere. But this is one of the examples that I use to show how the whole climate debate has been hijacked by this ridiculous language, green energy, carbon pollution. The lungs of the earth. I mean, if you think about it, lungs take in oxygen and they put out carbon dioxide. And yet they're saying that the Amazon rainforest magically does the opposite. So, I mean, it doesn't make sense because they say that the Amazon rainforest is responsible for 20% of the oxygen in the world. But it's not even possible. It's not even possible because the photosynthetic reaction transfers one molecule of CO2 to one molecule of oxygen. 21% of the atmosphere is oxygen. Well, you can't make that with the tiny, tiny amount of CO2 that's in the atmosphere.
You're absolutely
and
right.
You have to. And one quick point that'll blow people away is: did you know that the Amazon rainforest now in Brazil emits more CO2 than it absorbs because of the fires? Yeah, because of the fires, because of the deforestation. Overall, if you include all the countries that have Amazon rainforest, it does absorb some. It absorbs about 2% of human emissions. But the Brazilian rainforest itself is a net contributor to carbon dioxide emissions.
Tom. No, it's incredible. And maybe one last item that we can share that maybe will, get people electrified, and I use that word here, no pun intended, is the electrical issue of people's electric bills. Because maybe that will be the binding factor that people will say, look, this is ridiculous. We can't afford this. We can't do this. Something needs to be done. And if wind power is not the answer, obviously they're looking at things. Maybe they'll study more about what you offer and other people about opening our minds on the alleged climate scare that's taking place around this particular planet. Appreciate your time, my friend, and look forward to having you back. But more important than that, thank you for being up with us this early Sunday morning. And is it snowing right now where you are, or you don't know? You're looking out the window?
I can't see. I can't see right now, but it's supposed to be up to 15 centimeters, so I'll be out skiing, which will be great. Bring on the global warming. Hey, we don't want all this snow.
Tom Harris, always a great guest, and ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate him, as we always appreciate you. So if you haven't written this number down, even though this 2-hour show is now moving into time and space, it is always 1-800-848-9222. Great guest in coming weeks. We'll give you some surprises, and I think you'll enjoy it as we continue on the Dr. Sky Experience. And, ladies and gentlemen, we now pass the torch of dialogue to T.J. McCormick for the other side of midnight as we continue here on Talk Radio 77 WABC. And if you'd like to email me, it's simple. Just drsky@wabcradio.com. And don't forget, check out all previous editions of this radio archive. And how about all the other great hosts here 24/7 on WABC. And again, a thanks to our helmsmen, both Tony and Bill, navigating this incredible signal out to you around the nation, around the world, and I'm sure even out to the cosmos. Ladies and gentlemen, clear skies, great health, and obviously we look forward to seeing you next time. It's a privilege and honor to be behind the microphone. A shout out and thanks to owner and operator John Katzimatidis and Chad Lopez from the executive staff making it all happen. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Dr. Sky Experience. You can hear the Dr. Sky Experience Saturday mornings, midnight to 2 a.m. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder,
what the heck is going on here?
It's easy to get stuck reaching for the same familiar fruits and vegetables, even when you know a colorful variety is key. Balance of Nature's fruits and veggie supplements don't replace fruits and vegetables, but it makes it easy to add more variety to what you already eat. With 31 ingredients that are whole fruits and vegetables, switching it up is easy because we've already taken care of the hard part. Go to balanceofnature.com and get a free fiber and spice supplement, plus 35% off your first set as a new preferred customer by using discount code POD.